The past 2 weeks, Father John and I have been presenting a series in the bulletin on Catholic social teaching. It's meant to help us to form our consciences in engaging in public life as people of faith. And I've also been taking this opportunity to also speak about the topics at Mass as well. So last week, if you happen to read it, I wrote about the common good. And today I want to consider really the most fundamental principle of our social teaching, and that is of human dignity. Pope Benedict explained that as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, the principal focus of her interventions in the public arena is the protection and promotion of the dignity of the human person. So it's one of our foundational beliefs, that we believe that every human life is sacred. That God has revealed to us that we, made male and female, are in his image and likeness. That we're unique from all other creatures in that we have a body and a spiritual soul that enables us to know and to love in a finite way, following the way that God is able to know and love in an infinite way. And not even sin can take our image of being in an image of God away from us. Furthermore, as Christians, one through the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus, we are not only in his image, but now we are his adopted children, his beloved sons and daughters. And even those that aren't among the baptized, God loves them so much, having made them in his image, that he desires that they too enter into his family, just as we see this described in our gospel today, where the king desires people to come to the wedding banquet. Even those that we might disagree with, or even those that may do things to take away the dignity of others, we still see them as being made in God's image. So we recognize without any exception at all the great worth of every human being. And so based upon this understanding of the dignity of the human person, we have certain principles that we find to be not negotiable for us. Pope Benedict calls our attention to 3 of those specifically: the protection of human life in all stages, the promotion of the family, and the protection of the rights of parents for you to educate your children. And of course, the first of these 3 is primary: the protection of human life from the first moment of conception until natural death. And really at the foundation of any kind of issue we can talk about is that of the right to life. So, therefore, as Christians, we must oppose direct attacks on human life, from abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, unjust war, terrorism, death penalty. As Catholics, we care about many different issues because the foundation of the issues is the right to life. So last week, when I talked about the common good and care for the poor, those should be important to us because human life matters. We care for things like just economics and fair immigration policies, the environment, healthcare, because all of these affect human lives. But as the U.S. bishops have reiterated, the threat from abortion remains our preeminent priority because of just how directly it attacks human life. And because it takes place within what should be the most safest of places, the family, and because of just simply the vast numbers of lives that are destroyed. So our Catholic pro-life message should be focused on the protection of the unborn, but then also included in there to seek to care for the needs of those, especially mothers, who feel like that's their only option. They have no other choice. Because really abortion is also exploiting those women, because it deceives them into thinking that they have to sacrifice their child, rather than what real human love is all about, making sacrifices for others, especially children. And speaking of children, that leads us to the other 2 areas, that of the promotion of marriage and the family and the rights of parents to be able to educate their children. These are also essential to protecting the dignity of human persons. We must defend marriage as a union between one man and one woman, because not only are individual people made in God's image and likeness, but so is marriage in the family. The scriptures all over the place use marriage, human marriage, as an image to understand what God's love for us is like. And so we see that in the gospel parable that Jesus gives us today. We see this image of being invited to the wedding banquet of heaven. That Jesus is like the bridegroom, and each of us are like the bride. That's how close a relationship that God desires to have for us. But when marriage gets defined, redefined in ways contrary to what God has given us, it distorts the meaning of human dignity away from us being made in God's image. So we certainly have many different theological reasons for defending marriage, but we also have natural reasons that we can turn to of why marriage ought to be defended in the public sphere. And these can be easier if we're trying to talk about these topics with people that don't share a Christian faith background. So, for example, marriage is the only institution that's meant not just for the union of husband and wife, but it's also meant to unify moms and dads with their children. So all that the church teaches with regard to marriage and family and sexuality, it really can be spoken of in terms of protecting the dignity of children. A few weeks ago, many people were horrified when this film came out on Netflix that went so far as to sexualize children as a real affront to their human dignity. And I don't want to focus so much on that movie itself, but to think about, how do we reach a point in our society where there's people who think that that's okay? Because exploitation of children just doesn't come out of nowhere. Our world has really been falling down a slope in that direction for a long time. And there's a reason why our faith is so adamantly opposed to many of those things. We can, looking at this kind of slope and how we got here, you can go all the way to just the breakdown of adult relationships within marriage. Pope Francis notes that, oftentimes it's the souls of children that suffer most in those situations. Next, things like cohabitation and contraception. Those are really variations of different actions that separate the union of husband and wife from the possibility of having children, making it all about what adults want to do and excluding an openness to the gift of life. And this contributes, Pope Francis says, to a society which does not love to be surrounded by children, which considers them a worry, a weight, or risk. And even our Supreme Court in our country has acknowledged that there's a link between this kind of contraceptive attitude and abortion, saying that abortion needs to remain legal in our country because people rely upon it when contraception fails. And so we should note that, abortion itself is a clear exploitation of children, since it's literally the killing of an unborn child. So if marriage becomes only about what adults want to do and their fulfillment without the thought of children, then other types of union, including those like same-sex unions, can be argued to be valid. But Pope Francis has said that those types of unions are in no way similar or even remotely analogous to God's plan for marriage and family. If those types of unions seek then to have a child, the only way to make that happen is to purposefully separate a child from either a mother or a father, or sometimes both, since those unions, by definition, exclude one or the other. Also, the use of different means like IVF or surrogacy treat children as products that we can create as we desire, rather than as persons who must be received as a gift from God. Promotion of those kinds of relationships, as well as gender theory that has come up in our society more recently, is making its way now even into things for children. There's TV shows and books. exposing them to these kind of ideas younger and younger. And Pope Francis points out numerous times that this kind of gender ideology really tries to usurp parents' roles to be able to educate and guide their children. We also find cases where gender theory proponents insist that even young children can be transgender, advocating for even hormonal and surgical alteration, which, in opposition to the best child development science that we have, really is on the level of abuse. And finally, all of the kinds of explicit images and things that we find so easily available in our culture today that teaches the mind to treat people as objects. Children can accidentally come across it, becoming trapped for years in a cycle of shame. And with ever more gross forms, we ought to be horrified, if not entirely surprised, that this has led to almost normalizing this, even with use of children. If we've been asleep to the way that these things have been harming adults, maybe then we will awaken to the way that it's had devastation upon our children. So as Catholics, we must speak up and reject all these things because they're contrary to human dignity. And we want to speak up especially in the public sphere. And the reason for speaking up is always to help individuals to become free of those things, free from the things that can harm our dignity. We condemn things that harm people, but we desire the healing for the people themselves. As Pope Francis is so fond of saying, that the church is supposed to be a field hospital for those that are weak and infirm, to restore to them their worth and dignity that these kinds of things can strip from them. The king in the gospel parable that we have today, he represents God, and he sends out his servants, which is each one of us, to go and find guests to bring back to the wedding banquet, to bring back those that are bad and good alike, no matter who they are. And so that means that we are called to go and introduce people to the bridegroom Jesus, so that turning away from those things in our world that can harm us, that their worth and dignity will be restored, and they will be dressed in the wedding garment of God's grace.